Did they pull them up because of the sewers or because the trees were just getting old? Yeah. I was wondering if they took the trees up because of they're putting in new sewers. It was? Yes. Okay. All right. So, welcome. Thank you very much for having me here. Today I'm going to be talking about Kingsville's Division Street South. This is a project that the Kingsville Municipal Heritage Advisory Committee took on a few years ago, where we were looking at all the properties that are on Division Street South. And to begin this, I'll talk about what was written about in 1925 when a special correspondent from the Border City Star, that's the Windsor Star, wrote this in 1925. Today, there is no more beautiful street in the world than Division Street in Kingsville. Standing at the four corners and looking down towards the lake, the tourist sees a bower of huge trees reaching high up towards heaven with their wealth of branches and glorious green foliage, meeting in the center to form a perfect archway under which people may pass. Peeking through at the very end is a glimmering sheen of Silver Lake that adds its little touch of natural artistry to a scene that can be duplicated in very few places, if any at all. The writer has been in many cities, in many countries, but he has yet to see a spot that can surpass this bit of landscape that is a treat for every visitor to Canada's most southerly town. So, glowing remarks from Windsor. And this picture that we see is an old postcard. And over the years, there's many postcards showing this view from the north of Division Street South, looking south towards the lake. And it is beautiful with those trees. So we're going to be talking about Division Street South today and its history. I have right here is a map. Now I had to do it lengthwise because it's such a long street, but this is showing Division Street South stretching from Main Street down to Lake Erie, and it's about a 1.25 kilometers road. The east side of Division Street was Richard Harrington's farm, and the west side was Andrew Stewart's farm. So literally, Division Street was the dividing line of the county. And then when it came down towards the lake, those happened to be the two people that owned the farms. Now the four corners, which here in Kingsville we call Main and Division, they were mapped out in 1850. And it was Colonel King had kind of spearheaded this. He wanted to bring a town center to Kingsville, and he worked with Stewart and Harrington to come up with the four corners a town center. But the 1850 map was only dealt with like the north side of Mill, Pearl, Main Street, and then up to Water Street and Beach Street. And then it was like Queen Street over to Spruce Street. That was the town center at the time. Further developments happened on Division Street South, depending on, someone would buy like 55 acres of land and make all these building lots. So the rest of Division Street South was mostly mapped in the 1870s and 80s. Along the property now, there are 79 properties. And when the committee was doing the research for this project, we intensely researched every one of the 79 properties. So we do have a website. We have done some presentations featuring all 79 properties, but today we're just going to go through a few of them. The unique thing about Division Street South is the built heritage, or the houses and buildings that are still located there. The earliest one that's still there is from the 1870s, and we have built heritage from every decade, from 1870s till the 2010s. So it's really unique because it's just an evolving area of land. It's dynamic in that they're always doing modern things to it. And it's just, if you tell the history of Division Street South, you touch on every part of history of this area. And, added to the residential and the commercial buildings, Division Street South still has, can boast a public park. We do have a church, the Epworth United Church is on Division Street South. We have a funeral home. We have a police station, which was formerly the Kingsville Town Hall. We have the Arts Center, which is formerly the Carnegie Library. We have the Royal Canadian Legion. We have the Military Museum and Historical Park. And most recently, we have a condo down near the park. So it just kind of shows that that's a lot to pack into a little over a kilometer of land. So we're going to go through some of the properties, and I tried to pick a property from each decade to kind of show you the growth of Kingsville, and I tried to pick out the most interesting ones. So here we have the house it's 2 Mill Street is the actual address, but it does, it's on the corner of Mill and Division Street South. So this is a Gothic Revival house built in 1872, and it's seen many changes over the years. David Wesley Canfield was a successful businessman and lumberman, and he purchased this land in 1870, and 2 years later he had this home built. With his brothers Ryle and Nicholas, Canfield's many business interests in Kingsville included the Canfield Dock, a pump factory, freight depot, a lumber yard, and a sawmill, which was on the east side of Division Street South early on. D.W. Canfield was also a councillor for the village of Kingsville in 1880, and upon retirement, the Canfields left Kingsville for St. Louis, Missouri, and sold this property to William H. Helms in 1895. Helms was the publisher of the Kingsville Reporter from 1893 to 1935. His 3 daughters remained in the home until the last sister died in 1972. So as you can see, this is an early photo, and this house has in fact been designated by the town of Kingsville. It's a fabulous old photo.
I like the original.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next part we're going to is the house at 78 Division Street South. So this was the Elihu Scratch house. Elihu Scratch was the youngest son of Leonard and Sophia Scratch, and he was born in 1852 on the family farm on the lakefront near Arner. When he married Ellen Snyder in 1874, the young couple remained on the farm with Leonard and Sophia for 13 years. In February 1887, Elihu purchased property on Division Street South and built this home a few months later. The following year, Elihu purchased a lumber business from a local builder named Thomas Drake, who was moving to Iowa at the time. Elihu traveled to Georgian Bay to order and import 200,000 feet of pine lumber, lath, and shingles during the summer of 1888. So very successful, his lumber business. Eventually expanding his business, Elihu had a lane created to the north of his house to access his coal and wood yard that was actually located behind this house. In addition to his various business interests, Elihu also served his community as trustee, councillor, reeve, and mayor. Elihu and Ellen were married for 56 years and had 3 children, Nellie, Josephine, and Leonard J. After Ellen's death in 1931 and Elihu's in 1933, the oldest daughter, Nellie Hackett, inherited this home. So people might remember Nellie Hackett in town. She was quite a fixture in town. Included in the modern picture of the house is Josephine's wedding to Dr. Foster. And I selected this photo because it shows you that the detailing, the corbels and the gingerbread trim are still there in today's house. And I live not that far from this house, and I remember that all that decorative part had been sided over. And it wasn't until one of the owners had decided to fix up the house that when they took down the siding, that was all still there. So it's quite a find. So that house is really unique because it retains a lot of its original features. The next house, however, does not. And I promise you that it's the same house. I've had arguments with people about this, but I will tell you this is, in fact, the same house. Here we go.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. This house is from 1890, and it is quite a bit different. I'll tell you a little bit about the house and the history of it. House mover, yes, that was an actual job. House mover Peter J. Weigel and his wife Sarah moved into their new Scotch cottage-style house on Division Street South in June of 1890. So this house was built in 1890. Unfortunately, Uncle Peter, which is what everyone in town called Peter J. Weigel, he died 4 months later after moving into this house at the age of 79. His wife Sarah remained in the home and opened it up to boarders. One lodger was Seeger L. McKay, a hardware merchant from Woodstock. and this is rather funny. As reported in the Kingsville Reporter in the Amherstburg Echo in October 1890, quote, "Mr. McKay of the new hardware store is a single man. The girls have made note of this. If he worries through on his own more than 2 years, we give up. When our girls take a desirable young man in hand, the minister and cake is the general result." It took a little more than 2 years, but in June 1893, the following announcement was printed out in the newspaper. "Cards are out for the marriage of S.L. McKay of Kingsville to Edith, daughter of Louis Weigel, ex-MP of Leamington." After the wedding, Mac and Edith rented Sarah's house and eventually purchased it in 1899. So as you can see, many updates were made to this house. And I know it is. It's hard to imagine that they're the same house. And if anyone wants to dispute it, I have proof, but yes. And it's now, it was turned into a duplex at one time, and as you can see, some of the front kind of, push-outs in the front were all taken down. I don't know. I would love to know more about when this happened, but they are in fact the same house. And the picture on the left was printed in the Kingsville Reporter in 1899. So that's the only kind of proof we have of what this house originally looked like. So now we're getting into, we're still in the 1890s, and this is at 56 Division Street South, and this is Epworth United Church. The headline in the Kingsville Reporter on April 4th, 1935 was, "Epworth United Church burned." As reported the following week, there seems to be no doubt but that the fire started in or near the organ, and with all the electric current shut off, the origin of the outbreak is a still deeper mystery. Epworth Methodist Church was designed by Chatham architect James L. Wilson and built in 1893 with Thomas Jenner as the contractor. Woodawis Brothers as the brick and stonemasons, and H.R. Kratz was responsible for the iron and tin work in the original building. Memorial Hall, which was built in 1922, was saved from the fire. The new church was designed by Windsor architect J.C. Pennington and built on much of the original stone foundation by the Oxley brothers. The rebuilt Epworth United Church was dedicated on April 19th, 1936. And I remember talking to some people from the church, and they did use a lot of the bricks that they could save from the church. And you can tell because some of them still kind of are a bit smoke damaged or fire damaged, but they used as many of the original bricks as they can. So now we're getting into the 1900s. So a 2-story frame house was built in 1881 by James Workman King, who was Colonel King's oldest son, just north of the brick house that he was planning to build, which was going to be his residence on Division Street South. So this house is 68, not too far away down from the church. The home was quite modest and was used to house his hired men who were working on his house, and later became a rental property. In the fall of 1899, J.W.'s daughter, Mabel, became engaged to James R. Coate, a local hardware merchant. Mabel was given the frame house on Division Street South in anticipation of the wedding the following spring. Her fiancé purchased a house from John D. Weigel, who was preparing to build his own brick residence, and moved the house to Mabel's lot and attached it to the original home. So the original 1881 house is in the back. The larger house was brought and they were connected together. When completed in 1900, the home was described as one of the nicest and most convenient in town. The wood used in the interior is ash finished in oil, giving a very pretty effect. It is electric lighted throughout and piped for hot and cold water. Think, this is 1900. The woodwork on the structure was done by G.W. Mercer and reflects credit upon that gentleman's skill and taste as a workman. So as you can tell, this house hasn't retained a lot of its original decorative features. But it is interesting because I was talking to one of the people that live in the house, and they had always wondered why there was kind of like a bit of a discrepancy between the floorboards, between the back part and the front part. And it's because they just were smashing to, nothing goes to waste back then. Nothing, everything's recycled.
Wow.
So next, we're into the early 1900s, and we're talking about Lakeside Park, which has also been designated by the town of Kingsville. So, the Windsor, Essex, and Lakeshore Rapid Railway System began service from Windsor to Kingsville in 1907. That was the electric streetcar that came and went through Essex and Cottam, came down here. At the time, Kingsville's population, so we're talking 1907, Kingsville's population was 1,578. To take advantage of new tourism opportunities, Kingsville Town Council explored the idea of developing a public park on the lakeshore. So, a bylaw to raise by way of loan the sum of $5,000 for the purpose of purchasing and improving that land on the south side of Harrington Street, so the park where it is now, for the purpose of a public park, was put to a public vote. The park bylaw passed with a vote of 168 to 48. And Lakeside Park was open to the public in the summer of 1907. So we can thank 168 people for voting for the park in 1907. The pavilion that we see in this postcard was designed by Windsor architects Crane and Pennington and was built in 1913 by James Countess, a local, very prolific builder here in town. And in 1913, that pavilion cost $2,250. So we're moving up to 19 teens. So when, this is the Kingsville Library at the time, now it's the Carnegie Arts and Culture Center, and this is at 28 Division Street South. When American steel magnate Andrew Carnegie retired from active business in 1901, he devoted the rest of his years to philanthropy. In his lifetime, he donated $56 million to build 2,509 libraries throughout the world. Of the 125 Carnegie libraries built in Canada, 111 of them were built in Ontario. Kingsville was offered funding, and a library bylaw was voted upon during the 1911 municipal elections. And this bylaw passed by 235 to 34. The bylaw number 222 authorized the purchase of a library site, not to exceed $500, and the annual maintenance of an amount equal to 10% of the cost of the building in order to qualify. And so these things were put into place. The town had to have 10% of the cost of the building of the library as an annual maintenance, because you needed that to qualify for the $5,000 Carnegie Library grant. Windsor architects Crane and Pennington designed the library, and Kingsville Council had to approve an additional $2,000 to add to Carnegie's donation to cover the building costs. So it cost $7,000 to build in 1913. The Woodowist brothers were masons for the project, and the Oxley brothers were the contractors. So as you can tell, like the same names keep creeping up over and over again. We have Pennington as an architect from Windsor. We have the Oxley brothers. We have the Woodowist brothers. So definitely very prolific, and we had really good craftsmen in this town because a lot of the, including this library, we had lots of fieldstone foundations, and you needed really good craftsmen to work in that medium. Okay, so now we're at 73 Division Street South, and this would be a typical craftsman bungalow that you see all over town. We talked about this last month. The reason why I selected this one was because of the deed that we were able to research and the conditions that when Charles Jackson purchased this property. So when retired farmer Charles R. Jackson purchased the lot on Division Street South from Curtis Green, he agreed to the following conditions. 1, no building other than a dwelling house, which when erected shall not be of less value than $5,000, and a private garage shall be erected upon said land at any time hereafter. It had to go strictly residential. Part of the reason is because Curtis Green actually had a weather stripping factory next to this house. And in fact, if you see the circled, on the map, you see the circled part, which is this house here. Just to the south of that is the old weather stripping factory. So he was looking, and his house is across the street. So I think he was tired of looking at a factory. And you know, they were trying to really kind of, in the 20s, beautify Division Street South. They kind of realized what they had, and they were making gains in just trying to take away some of the manufacturing components that were on Division Street South. The second rule on the deed was said dwelling shall be erected upon said lands within 18 months from this date. So he was not able to buy, you were not allowed to buy this land and let it sit there for a while. You had to build a house. It had to be worth at least $5,000, and you had to build it within 18 months. So he was also, so this is Charles Jackson, the new owner of the property, was given the right to use as a private roadway a strip of land 4 feet wide adjoining said land on the south side. So there's kind of a unique connection between these two houses, because the property itself wasn't large enough to be, you know, two good-sized lots, let's say. So you can see that there's a very small gap in between the two houses. And so they share a driveway. And because the person who bought the land to the south also had these conditions in his grant. You had to build a house, had to be worth $5,000. You had to do it between 18 months. And you could only have a house and a garage. So because they were so close together, they went together and they built a garage together. So they actually share the garage in the common driveway there. So this was, you know, with the end of World War I and talk of building an international bridge between Detroit and Windsor, Kingsville was actively trying to appeal to summer tourists. Building restrictions on Division Street South was an attempt to keep it, quote, one of the most attractive streets one could wish to see. Not only did Jackson build this handsome home in 1921, but he was also well known for his gardening skills. Retired farmer, you know, it's to be expected, I think. So we're getting into the 1930s, and this is when Kingsville had a movie theater. Mr. Garnet Hogarth had this building constructed in 1935 to house his new movie theater. As described in the Kingsville Reporter, Roxy Theater, which has been under the construction here for some weeks, had its opening on Monday evening which was October 21st, 1935. The theater is modern in all its appointments and will seat 500 people. It is air-cooled for summer with forced heat and ventilation for winter, luxurious upholstered leather seats, 100% fireproof, sound equipment, North Electric wide range, one of the latest developments in picture sound science. Pictures to be shown here will be secured from the largest and best major picture producers. The uniformed ushers in the theater are Robert Tingle and Warren Lehman, and the lady at the wicket is Mrs. Hogarth. And Mr. Hogarth is his own projectionist. So, yes, quite a change. So this is when Kingsville had the movie theater. All right, moving on to the 1940s, because we're doing decades here in Division Street South. So this is a house at 185 Division Street South, built in 1948. So with the end of World War I, began a boom in home construction in Kingsville, in Canada, and families were eager for a change from the austere existence of the preceding 7 years. Although homes built during this period were not going to be large, it was hoped that houses could be designed as an improved wartime housing unit with basements, central heating, and other similar amenities. In 1945, the Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation Act was established, not only to encourage and protect mortgage lending, like they still do today, but also to develop a national building code and improve technology and efficiency. The CMHC worked with Canadian architects to produce floor plan catalogs and blueprints available for purchase. This home was built for George and Eva Moore in 1948 and is a typical example of a post-war house. It is very cute. Now, it doesn't look like that anymore, but I'm glad we got a picture of it when it looked like this, the house on the right. So they're not exactly the same, but very similar. So these are the types of houses, and you could buy building kits from, lots of, we were talking about Eaton building kit. We have Sears, we have Bay City building kits, Aladdin building kits. But these were also just blueprints that you could purchase if you had the craftsmen in your own community and access to building supplies that you could build your own. So yeah, cute little house from the 1940s. Now we're getting to the 1950. And this one's a little bit different because the house was not built in 1950, but moved here in 1950. So this house is at 141 Division Street South. When J.H. Smart, with his partner Dr. S.A. King, divided the 44 acres on the east side of Division Street South into building lots, which we talked about before, he left himself over 3 acres surrounding his house. Construction of Smart's 2.5-story home was made of white brick and building stone from Pelee Island. And it took 2 years to complete and was completed in 1880. 70 years later, the house was owned by Donald Taggart and was home to 4 families consisting of 17 people. And in February 1950, the house was destroyed by fire. So the house that I was describing is no longer standing, but there was this huge 3-acre lot. Within 2 weeks of the fire, Taggart purchased a home on Chestnut Street, which was built in 1902. And so this is a picture from the Kingsville Reporter of the house when it was on Chestnut Street. And he moved it in front of his ruined house. And the house was purchased by Ewald and Frida Erdmann in 1953, shortly after their immigration from Poland. So yeah, so this was just, we listed it as 1950 because we're talking about the development of Division Street South. So it didn't appear on Division Street South until 1950. But yeah, your house burns down, you just go buy another one and move it over.
Imagine back in those days moving a house.
Exactly. All right, so now we're getting into the 1960s. And this would be a pretty, again, 1960s, a common kind of bungalow, all on one floor, very typical. But I selected this house because I had kind of an interesting place, this type of house in Canadian history. So according to Canadian Social Trends magazine, between 1946 and 1950, over 430,000 immigrants arrived in Canada between 1946 and 1950. The immediate post-war immigration boom that included the dependents of Canadian servicemen who had married abroad, refugees, and people seeking economic opportunities in Canada. So Adam Binder and his wife Katerina and their 7 children emigrated to Canada from Yugoslavia in 1948. Working as a farmer locally and a tinsmith, Adam was able to have this home built in 1960. And in 1973, Adam and Katerina celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. So I think it's a very nice, story about people coming over, after the aftermath. Well, this is during the war, after the Second World War, and be able to work hard, bring your family here, and eventually become successful enough to, build your own house here on Division Street South. So it's a very sweet house. And on the left just shows one of these building lots that we were talking about, where people would take a parcel of land and they would map out building lots. Something interesting that I can tell you about that is early building lots were not measured out in were mostly measured out in chains and rods. So a chain is 66 feet long. And and that's why a lot of streets were, 66 feet wide, because those were one chain. So all the building measurements were done in these chains. So the typical building lot of the time, that part would have probably been mapped out like the 1880s, so they would have been using chains. So most building lots were 1 chain by 2 chain. That means it's 66 feet by 132 feet. So people wonder about the odd, outline of building properties. It's because of the old-fashioned way of surveying, which was chains. And so it shows here. So by 1931, when they were duplicating this map, they were not using rods and chains anymore, so that's why you see the 66 feet as frontage of all the properties.
Yeah, some of them are smaller.
Yes.
Yeah.
132, what? Yeah, up.
1 and 2.
Yeah, so sometimes that would, if they were trying to pack them together, and honestly, later on, other parts of the town is people would buy maybe 2 lots, so that'd be 132 by 132, and then they would divide it into 3 building lots. So, you know, as time progressed, property got more expensive, they started reducing the size of lots in town. But early lots are 1 chain by 2 chain. So 1978, this is the, you know, the corner store, the Daisy Mart. It's had a few names over the years, at the corner of Division and Elm. So think about Division Street South. We talked about it's the 1870s, the 1880s that people had started building along the street. And the lot on the corner of Division and Elm, which is where this property is, it remained vacant until the 1950s, which seems very odd to me because it seemed like a prime piece of real estate. But nothing was built on it until the 1950s, and that's when Al's Finest Station opened, offering gasoline, oil, car washes, and minor repairs. The property was sold in 1976, and the new owners wanted to convert the property into a convenience store and gas bar, but the neighbors objected. At a council meeting during the summer of 1976, the contact with the neighbors resulted in a reasonable compromise. A gas bar was opposed, and the immediate homeowners wanted a private dwelling. If the property is to be commercial, the compromise was for a convenience store without a gas bar. It took a couple years and a hearing from the Ontario Municipal Board before the plans for a variety store were completed. A portion of the original station was torn down, and the 30-foot by 56-foot addition was completed in 1976. But it shows that, you know, someone wants to go and build something, and the neighbors around object, and this is, you know, people coming together to compromise. Otherwise, there'd be a gas station right there. Okay, 1885. Not everyone's favorite building in town, but I will tell you this. As I was researching the Division Street South project, this is the only property on Division Street South that was built in the 1980s. So it saved my project, so I kind of love it a little bit more now. Otherwise, it would be division of time, 15 decades of built heritage, yeah, except for the 80s. So to give you a little bit of history about this, this building, when the Monaco building complex was completed in 1985, it contained 18 apartment units and 12,000 square feet of commercial space. The building replaced 2 blocks that were destroyed by fire in 1981, and that would be the picture on the left. The picture on the left shows the Weigel-Conklin block that was on the corner of Division and Main and was completed for Dr. Andrew Weigel and David Conklin in 1896. So the house on the left was in the building on the left, 1896. And just south of the block was the E.A. Brown block, which was built in 1923. The Brown block was Kingsville's post office until 1936, when the federal building was opened up on the northeast corner of Division and Main. The Monaco Buildings contract worked closely with the town, Monaco, and Nova Goldsmiths, so that the building would blend in with the present decor of the downtown area. And I'm sure they said that with a straight face. And included a gift to the people of Kingsville, which is the triangle of land that replaced the loss of the town square. So for people who may remember, before this building was built, there was actually kind of like a park there and a green space. So, so they end up giving the triangle that's there as a gift to the town of Kingsville. So yes, it doesn't necessarily fit into the Victorian, buildings along Division Street, but it's what we have now. And it's from the 80s, and it saved my project. So I feel I have tender feelings towards it. Okay, so this is the Charlie Campbell Museum, 145 Division Street South, but you have to go through the Legion parking lot to see it at the back. So this is the Charlie Campbell Memorial Museum, and it holds collections regarding the United Empire Loyalists and artifacts and information on the people of Essex County and their involvement in the defense of their country in the Fenian raids, Boer War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Cold War, peacekeeping, Bosnia, and Afghanistan. Groundbreaking took place on December 22nd, 1997, and the museum was opened to the public on November 11th, 1999. Named after a World War II veteran, Charlie Campbell, he served as a mid-upper air gunner in the 419th Moose Squadron, RCAF, and was the Royal Canadian Legion's Mobile Museum's first curator. Wonderful place. If you haven't been to the museum, you definitely have to check it out. It's incredible. And not just if you're into military history. There's history of all sorts there. It's such a hidden gem here in this community. On the left is a 1950s map that kind of shows, because the property on Division Street South is kind of where the Legion is, and then you have all the way back to Lansdowne. Behind this museum, there's actually like outdoor exhibits that have some ordnance, some larger outside guns, and I think some military vehicles are in the back. So it kind of shows that where the part of the military museum and the historical park is, it's actually covering up where the Conklin planing mill was and where there was a spur on the local railway station as well. So it's kind of nice to see that all that's on the right-hand side of the map, it's all gone now, and that's where the museum is. So next, we're in 2001. We're in the early 2000s. In 1916, the town of Kingsville granted an eastern portion of Lakeside Park, it's the eastern portion of Lakeshore Park, to the Department of the Naval Service of the Dominion of Canada for a fish hatchery. Built on the west side of Division Street South, the hatchery was 87 feet long by 36 feet wide, 2 stories high, and was used to raise herring and whitefish for the western end of Lake Erie. Also built in 1916 was a 2-story house for the superintendent, just west of the hatchery. And you can see that in the map. The dwelling that's on the left, that was the superintendent's house. The property was returned to the town in 1962 when the hatchery was closed, and the building was used as a public works garage. In 1998, the hatchery building was demolished, and the superintendent's house was sold and moved to Elm Street, where it still is now. The property was developed to include these townhouses on the new Lakeside Crescent in 2001. So even though it's Lakeside Crescent, this is at the base of Division Street South, and it kind of shows that, further development and the fact that people are looking to have property along the lakeshore. And we have the dance studio in 2012. So for 57 years, for 57 years, from 1868 to 1925, the northeast corner of Division and Pearl, which is where this building is, it was owned by the Cooper family. George Cooper was born in London, England in 1832 and emigrated with his family to Canada when he was 13 years old by way of Quebec City and Oswego, New York. George finally settled in Kingsville in 1851. So we're looking, remember I said the town was planned out in 1850, he was there at the beginning, and he bought this property, and he remained in this property till his death in 1914. Cooper was a tailor by trade and conducted his business out of his home on this lot. The Cox Brother Garage replaced the Cooper House in 1929, and Ernie Cox built a 2-story addition for his bicycle shop in the 1930s. Over the years, the 1-story garage was home to a laundromat, box office video, a sports equipment store, and a youth center. This 2-story brick building, which features a dance studio, or it did at the time, was built on the former site of the garage and was completed in 2012. So on the left kind of shows you exactly what was there before, and then what we have there now. Just showing the fact that Kingsville kind of is advancing and it's very dynamic in, its ideas and its citizens. And we have the end. So that shows you, I'm hoping, so we're in 2022, I'm really hoping that someone builds something else on Division Street South in the 2020s so that we can continue this project. But that is some of the houses and buildings that are on Division Street South. I mentioned before that there are 79. If you go to this website, which is very easy, Division of Time, you can Google it. It goes through and shows all the different properties, and it has a little bit more information about all the properties. And then you can always, through that website, you can also ask questions, or even some people, which was very generous of them, will go on to some of these houses and they'll add their own memories. So they're in the comment section on those houses, and it just kind of keeps, you know, this as a living history for Division Street South. Do we have any questions? Why, thank you. Yes?
On the picture for Lakeside Crescent, it also shows the bridge. So what year, do you know when that bridge was built?
Aha. Let me see. Well, you know, after we're done the production, after we're done this session right here, I'm pretty sure I have it in my computer, and I can tell you, because it was just refurbished, I think, not too long ago. Yes, but yeah, that does show the concrete bridge. Yes, oh yeah, I think, yeah, I can definitely get you the date for that, for sure.
That'd be the Stone Bridge?
That is the stone bridge, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Any other questions or comments?
Wow, this is amazing.
We do have a lot of really good history here in Kingsville, and I love the fact that it's just like on this one short span of street that it really tells the story. And when we get into the other 79, there's definitely more about the fishing industry and how that was brought up. And just, it's just a really unique area of town, and I think we're really happy and fortunate to have it here. So if there's no other questions, we'll end it here, but I'll stay after here if there's any other questions. And thank you very much for coming out. I really appreciate it.